All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and my apologies for being a little bit late. My name is Joe Macbeth, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, and we welcome you today to How to Give Feedback with Perry Samowitz. Before I turn it over to Perry, I'd like to just remind you that this is a busy week for webinars for NADSP. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we will be doing a webinar with Dave Hingsberger and Dr. Yona Lunsky titled What the Doctor Ordered, How DSPs and the Medical Profession Work Together. And then on Thursday, July 14th, we have a webinar with one of our faculty members, Jennifer Parsons, on diversity awareness. That's July 14th at 2 p.m. And then July 25th at 11 a.m., the last in our series of webinars with OPWDD, What Workforce Transformation Means to Me as a Service Recipient and Parent, with the wonderful Letitia Alcorn. So with that said, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Perry Samowitz. Perry?
Thank you, Joe, and hi to everyone out there. I assume most people are from New York State, but it's possible there are people from out of the state also. I wanted to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about who I am and then what we're going to cover today. And my name is Perry Samowitz, as you heard, and I am currently the lead for Region 3 of the Centers for Workforce Transformation in New York State. Workforce Transformation is a project that originated about 3 years ago, and it's really to provide certain trainings and skill development for DSPs in order for them to provide the best possible service and support for people with disabilities. I originally started in, actually today is July 11th, and I started in the field on July 12th in 1976, which is 40 years ago. I opened one of the first group homes in New York State. I supported 15 people coming out of Willowbrook, Letchworth, and other institutions, and a few people from the community. And I started as a supervisor. I supervised the program, and one thing I learned right away is no one ever taught me how to supervise. I never learned anything about it. And supervision is a very difficult issue if you've never been trained on it. So I kind of learned as I went along, and I didn't feel like that's a good way to learn something. It would have been better to have some training before I started. But way back in those days, there was almost no training in the field, and we just kind of learned, as I said, as we went along. I worked for 37 years at YAI, which used to be called the Young Adult Institute in New York, and I worked as a resident supervisor, as I said, for 2.5 years, residential coordinator, which means I had 8 programs reporting to me, for another 2.5 years, and then 32 years I was the director of training at YAI. And one of the things I thought about right away was, what type of training do staff need in order to best do their jobs? And also, what training do supervisors need in order to best do their jobs? Because the frontline supervisor the role of the frontline supervisor is critical in terms of the development of skills for staff. And one of the most critical aspects is how to give feedback. And actually, a number of years ago when I was working at YI, I was asked to run a management training institute. And I asked a number of the managers, we had about 400 managers at YI, I asked them, what would you like to learn in terms of management? And one of the things that popped up right away was how do you give feedback in a way that someone will really understand it, accept it, and grow from it? And that's what we're going to really talk about today, is how do you give feedback? I also want to make sure the word feedback is clear. A word that I hear a lot is you want to give people constructive criticism. And that's a word that really I don't like, because to criticize someone, even if it's done constructively, can have a negative connotation, and we really don't want that. Feedback it's to me a friendlier word. So I got rid of the word constructive criticism a number of years ago. I just don't like ending with the word criticism. So feedback, as I said, is much more friendly. And really, how do you give feedback to somebody? Now, I created a video with the Center for Disability Services, in Albany, we made a video that's available on the website, the workforcetransformation.org website. Later, I'll take us into the website. We're not going to see the video today, but on the video, I actually give supervision to 2 staff, and I give them feedback on how they're performing. And I think if you're very interested in this topic, or you're learning about how to give feedback, I would highly recommend looking at that video. There's also a trainer's manual if you're going to train on it. Okay, so what I want to talk today, though, about is how to give feedback. And if you notice on the screen underneath it, it says something about StarWar. And I'll get to that later because that's how you actually word it. Let me get started, though, with the first slide. Now, if you're watching staff work and then you're going to give them feedback, it's probable that the staff may be a little anxious in hearing what you have to say, because in some ways they're going to feel like they're being judged. And especially if staff is just learning how to do something, learning how to do a certain skill or a task, they may be very sensitive to the feedback, and they want to make sure that they're doing it okay. So for instance, I used to run a training for staff on how to run groups with people with profound disabilities, what we used to call profound disabilities, now people who need much more support. And I used to teach certain skills within that group activity of how to do that. And staff, when I first sat down with them and I'd start going over it, I noticed they were very, very anxious. So one of the things I learned in giving feedback, start with thanking the staff for their effort. They're trying. They're trying, and why not acknowledge that right away? And acknowledge that the work is challenging also, because a lot of the work we do, it's not that easy. It isn't that easy, and it may have taken us years to learn it, and here they are learning these certain skills. So you want to really thank them for their effort. And the reason I do that when I first give feedback to staff is I also want to maintain their morale. I want to make sure that at that moment they realize that they're being appreciated, because I don't think, honestly, DSPs are appreciated enough for the work that they do. So to maintain their morale is critical, and if you start with a statement that they may construe as negative, then they may not even listen to what you have to say after that. Now, I did put up on the screen, only if the staff person is a good worker overall would you thank them for their effort. If someone is really very mediocre and is struggling, I probably don't want to give them the message, thank you for your effort, because I want to make it clear that the work they're doing is really not meeting the standards that we have in New York State. We have the core competencies now, and if they're really not meeting it, and not even close to meeting it, then I just want to make it clear to them that what they're doing is not acceptable. So for thanking them for their effort, for instance, let me give you an example. They may have used inappropriate language with an individual. And in the core competencies, we talk about, making sure you use person-first language. And they may not do that on a regular basis, and it permeates through their work. It may be, they don't show respect for the individuals. And that's a big issue. So to thank them for their effort at that point, I don't think I would do. I think I would just come in and say, look, we really need to talk about the way in which you relate to the individuals, and the people, because it's a serious issue. But in general, if I'm trying to train to a skill, and the person is really trying hard and they're good, then I would thank them for their effort, and I would always start with that. Okay, and again, the purpose is you want to maintain the morale of the staff. You want to do that. Okay. The next slide is what happened. Now, I was once given an article from the Harvard Business Review, which I honestly don't read that much, but somebody said, Perry, it is an interesting article about supervision. I want you to read it. And it talked about when to ask and when to tell and the importance of it. And I never thought about that before. And I think I had a tendency as a manager to tell first and maybe ask later. And really, that's kind of reverse. So if you see an interaction between a staff and an individual, and you want to give the staff feedback so they can grow and develop their skills, it's probably better in most cases to ask them what they felt transpired, what happened, and then later tell them what you saw. So it's done out of respect. You know, I think about yourselves. Isn't it better if someone had feedback for you, but they asked you first what you thought? Wouldn't you feel appreciative of that? Okay. Also, you get to hear the person's perspective and understand their rationale for why they did what they did, which is very, very important. If you speak first, you may never hear that. And sometimes we wonder, you know, I've heard supervisors say to me, well, Perry, you know, I sit down with the staff in supervision, they don't say anything. You know, I'm always talking to them, but they're not saying anything. And maybe what is happening is you're telling them things, but you're not asking them. You know, and that's why it's always good to start by asking. And by asking, you're asking them to open up and really talk. And usually that is successful. And the other reason is why I would do this, ask first, tell later, is because I want to increase their morale again. That's hugely important. Again, morale is critical for DSPs. You know, they're not making a lot of money, we know that. And, you know, they're working hard in their jobs and they need to feel appreciated. And everywhere I go around the state, I always ask that question, do you think DSPs are appreciated enough for their work? And the answer is always no. Okay, well, as a supervisor, you want to appreciate their work for many reasons. One reason is people tend to leave a job if they don't get along with their supervisor. So if they don't feel appreciated by their supervisor, you can lose some good staff. We can't afford to lose good people anymore because it's very, very difficult to find good staff. We know that. And it's getting harder all the time. The vacancy rates are huge. So if we have someone who's really good, we want to keep them. And one way of keeping them is to treat them in a respectful manner and to really ask their opinion, and hopefully their morale will go up. So the first 2 points that I'm making is thank you for your effort. You know, you're thanking them for their trying, and that helps their morale. And the second thing is you're asking them what happened. And again, in a way that you really want to listen. Okay, and by doing that, you're also increasing morale. And later, when you want to give them your feedback on how they did, hopefully they're going to be more open and responsive to hearing it. Okay, then what I recommend you do, and these are strategies, and I actually put them in a certain order because I feel like if you jump too quickly into where the problem is, the staff may shut down or not be willing to talk about it or not be receptive to listening about it, which is not okay. So that's why I kind of, when I teach this, when I go out in the region, I teach this to supervisors, I do emphasize the process and the order in which you say these things. So the third thing is, after you thank them for their effort and after you ask them what happened, here's what you did really well. Now, I like to ask them first, what do you think you did well? You know, you just worked with Mary and you worked with her on her eating goal, and you're trying to help her to chew slower. Okay, she chews too quickly, and that's dangerous in some ways. So we're working on a goal to help her. Now, let's say the staff didn't do it perfectly, but they did some things well. So I like to ask them, I'd like to know their opinion. What do you think you did well? I'd always ask that first. Because, again, I want to emphasize what I would call the positive. And they do things that are really good, but they never hear about it. You know, you don't want to just highlight where the problems are. So, again, I would ask them, what do you think you did well? And listen for their response. Sometimes staff, they're not sure. You know, they would say, I don't know. And I said, well, you know, think about it. What did you do that was good? Okay, now, then you give a praise to the staff. Here's what I saw you do that was really good. Here, you know, I noticed that you had Mary pick up the napkin and wipe her mouth and then put the napkin down between bites. That was great. That's exactly what we want you to do. Never, ever put a but at the end of a statement that's a praise statement. Because you might say something like, oh, I really like the fact that you had Mary pick up the napkin and wipe her face and then put the napkin down, but you didn't do that enough. You should be doing that more. They're going to hear that they didn't do it well. And I don't like to combine a but statement with a praise statement. I think it negates it, and it just takes the air out of the balloon, as they say. It's not good. So when you give someone a praise statement, I always kid around when I say this, but I mean it, you got to close your mouth at the end of the statement and let them absorb it. Let them really hear what you had to say and let it sink in a little bit. Don't attach it to, and now I want to tell you what I really want to tell you. Because they call that the sandwich way of giving praise. I always hated that. I always felt like it was a setup. If a person always did that to me, and they would say something really nice, and I know what was following was what they really wanted to say to me, and that's not okay. So I was just kind of ignoring what they originally said and kind of thinking, just tell me what you want to tell me. Okay, so you do want to give a praise statement, but you want it to sink in. So you got to think about this, and later I'm going to show you ways of doing this. But a praise statement is critical, and as I say, butt out. Take the butt and leave it out. Let them absorb it. And again, praise increases morale. So now we've done 4 things to increase their morale while they're getting feedback. Number 1, we thank them for their effort. Number 2, we ask them what happened, not tell them. Number 3, we are now giving them the praise statement. And now we're moving to the 4th one. And the 4th one, you're going to ask them if there's any problems or concerns, particularly that they had in that situation. And you got to listen very carefully to what they say the problems or concerns are. Because sometimes they're stuck in what I call a faulty belief system, and I'm going to cover that again in a few minutes. But I want to go over that. Because sometimes that belief system is really what's hurt, kind of handicapping the staff from doing what they need to do. All right? And if they are having a faulty belief system, you want to gently try to have them see it from a different angle. Because if they keep that faulty belief system, it's not going to work with the individual and they're going to get frustrated. Okay, I'll get to the emotional part, which is up on the screen after. Let's go over the faulty belief system. In one of the videos that I show on the website, workforcetransformation.org, and it's the 4th video, which is on supervision, which has everything I'm talking about in there. In one of the scenes, there's a staff person who is supporting an individual to eat breakfast, and the individual is eating too much food. He's taking too much food, and the staff says to him, "It's my job to make sure you don't eat so much." That's what he says. Now, is that true? Is that his job? That's called the belief system. He believes that his role is to make sure that that person doesn't eat too much. Well, is that true? Well, not really. What is our job? Our job is to support the person to make choices that the person wants to make, and hopefully if they understand the ramifications of those choices, then we did our job. If they overeat way too much, yeah, we don't want to accept that, and we may have to go back to the team and say the plan that we've been working on is not working, and the individual is not following their own plan. Okay? Obviously, if a person needs much more support, and they don't have the ability to understand that they're overeating, then our role will change in that type of situation. But if the staff believes it's my job to make sure you don't overeat, for someone who's capable of understanding the ramifications of what they're doing, that is not their role. So if the staff person says that to the individual will most probably get their back up, and they're going to get upset, and you're going to get into what's called a power struggle. And that is not healthy for the individual, and it's definitely also not healthy for the staff. So one of the things I try to do is I might, say to the staff, how would you feel if I said to you, like if they had coffee and they were drinking coffee as we were talking, and if I said, my job is to make sure you don't eat that coffee drink that coffee because the coffee is not good for you. How would you feel if I said that to you? And the staff would probably say, well, you have no right to tell me that. I said, okay, then why do you have a right to tell the individual that? What makes that okay? All right? That's not the way we do business here. That's not the way we should be treating people. So what I'm trying to do is get him to change that belief system where he's getting stuck. All right, so I listen for that. I kind of listen for what the staff is saying, you know, and I ask them, what do you think your role is in that situation? You know, and then they'll tell me, and then I'll say, oh, okay. But if it's a belief system that's faulty, then I want to make sure they understand that it's faulty and not keep carrying that around with them. The other thing on the page here is if a staff person is very emotional, you must deal with that first. I have many times dealt with staff who are very upset after a difficult interaction with an individual. I've had staff cry in my office. I've had staff get very angry, you know, vent out a lot of anger, you know. And what you have to do there is be supportive of what they're going through at the moment, you know, because, again, you're away from the individual, so you're not dealing with it right in front of the person. But if the staff is emotional, it's not a good time to have a rational discussion with them about what happened. It's more important to acknowledge their emotion and validate that, yeah, this job can be challenging and it can be very difficult, and at times all of us get frustrated. Okay, so that's what I recommend to do if the person's emotional, and once you see them calm down a little bit, then you can talk about strategies and feedback of how they might do it in a way that would have a better result. All right, now, one thing that's very important, one of the core competencies is the ability to receive feedback. We put that in when we wrote the competencies. I was on the team that actually wrote the competencies with a group of others, and we talked a lot about that skill for staff. If staff are unable to hear feedback, they're probably not going to do well in their job. And we want to make sure from day one that they understand that. So the word that I was trained on was developmental feedback, that we want to give you feedback to help you develop as a professional. One of the things I like to do is, you see up on the screen there are 3 bullets, and I like to have the staff read those bullets. I like to even give it to them when they start out in the job. And it's the rationale for getting feedback. So the first thing is, you will become a more highly skilled staff person. That's why we give you feedback. Is that positive or negative? Well, it's positive. You know, I hope that every staff person wants to become more highly skilled. That doesn't mean they don't have skills. They do have skills, but we're trying to enhance their skills. And any good staff would want that. So that's a positive. We're giving you feedback to help you grow and develop your skills. The second thing, the reason we give you feedback, is you'll be able to provide better support to people with disabilities. You know, all of us constantly have to be asking ourselves, are we providing the right type of support for individuals, and where can we improve in doing that? Because it's a very tricky job. It's not a simple job. Our values come into play, and it may bounce against the values of the individuals we support. So there's a lot of issues that go with this. But in hearing feedback, you will provide better support for people with disabilities. And again, that is a positive. That is not a negative. The last thing, and kind of pulling it all together, is to help you grow as a professional. You are in a professional job. You are a direct support professional. You're not a caregiver. Okay? The word professional means that you have a certain skill set and that you're going to learn a certain skill set. It also means that you're going to behave as a professional on the job. The way you interact with individuals, the way you act with other staff, okay, your professional demeanor, the way you carry yourself. All feedback does is try to help you grow as a professional. And in the competencies, we have listed the skills required to be a professional in our field. And that's why we're going to be using the competencies, and I'll show you later how we do that, in order to support the staff. But I want to emphasize that these 3 points, you're going to become more highly skilled, you're going to provide better support to people with disabilities, you're going to grow as a professional. That's why we give feedback, and staff need to hear that. It's not a personal issue. It's not whether you like them as a person or not. That's not what this is. It's the way they're working with the individuals, the way they're performing on the job. That's all this is. And I think from day one, staff should know why we give feedback, and it's to help them grow. It's not punitive. It's actually very positive. Okay? Now, in supervision, we have a number of tools that have been created that I'm very proud to be part of this creation, and the core competencies is one of them. The NADSP Code of Ethics, which is super important, is another one, and also something that in Region 3 we created called the Empowerment Strategies. But basically, you want to use these documents and these handouts in supervision, and because it professionalizes what you're doing and it takes away from the personal. We have 110,000 DSPs across New York State, and all of them have to adhere to the core competencies, and all of them have to adhere to the NADSP Code of Ethics. They all do. But we as managers need to be using those documents ongoing. So the staff are very, very familiar with them and understand that this is what you're being held accountable to, and we're going to help you with that. I know there was a recent seminar on evaluation, which one of my colleagues, John, did, and it was excellent. I heard it over the weekend. And he talked about, the core competencies, code of ethics, and how you evaluate staff. But evaluation is the end of a process. All year long in supervision, staff should be hearing about the competencies, hearing about the code of ethics, and again, knowing how they're doing based on that. Okay, so you have a wonderful tool now to use that we didn't have years ago. We never had the core competencies. We never had the code of ethics. It's great that we all have it. Every staff person is now on the same page, but it's up to you as a manager to be using it in supervision. And again, on the video that I created with the Center for Disability Services, we show how it is used. So if you're curious about seeing it in action, you can go onto the workforcetransformation.org website and go to Resource Library Videos and video number 4. You'll see number 4, which is supervision. You can actually watch it be demonstrated. All right, now we get to StarWar. I was asked again, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the webinar, how do you say something to someone in a way that you won't hurt their feelings? What's the best way of saying it? And the answer is I didn't know. I don't know. What is the best way? So I did some research, and I came up with, or I found something called StarWar, and I want to share it with you. I thought it was a very good way of approaching, telling someone where they need to improve and why they need to improve. The S and T in the STAR is situation or task. You start with the situation or task, and I'll give you an example of it in a few seconds. The A is action taken by the staff. What are you pinpointing? The R is the results of the action. What was the result on the individual? Okay? And then W, what alternative action? And ask the staff, what might you do differently? And then what could be the alternative result based on your action? Okay, so let me now get it more concretely. Situation or task. So let's say you were supporting an individual to do their banking and you're out in the community with them. All right, well that's the situation or task. Yesterday you took Johnny to go to the bank and to deposit a check. Okay, situation or task. Action taken by staff. You handed, as a staff person, you handed the deposit slip to the teller. Okay, well what was the result of that action? The result was that Johnny did not fully participate in handing, his deposit slip. Also, a result was the cashier at the bank saw Johnny as not capable instead of being a capable person, which is not good. We want to teach the community that our guys are capable, that people with disabilities are capable, but they're capable by showing it. And if he was able to hand that slip to the cashier, she would learn that he has competency, that he's a capable person. Okay, also, it may hurt his self-esteem. Why are you handing the slip? Why couldn't he do it? So the result of the action on the individual could be his self-esteem could be hurt. Okay, now what alternative action? And I would say to the staff, what might you have done differently based on that scenario? What could you have done differently? Okay, and brainstorm with the staff. Well, the staff might say, you know what, I wanted Johnny to hand the slip, but there were 5 people behind him online, and those people, you know, would get antsy and they get angry, and then they may insult Johnny. I said, okay, well then what could you do differently to speed it up? Is there anything you can do so that Johnny is really ready to hand that slip? You know what I mean? Instead of fumbling for the slip and looking for the slip, might there be something you could have done to prepare Johnny to do that? Could you have role-played it back in the program? Okay, so there are things you might have done, and by doing that, by Johnny handing that slip to the cashier, the alternative result is what? What is the alternative result on Johnny? Well, he feels proud that he participated. His self-esteem has gone up. As I said earlier, the cashier sees him as a capable human being, not as someone with a disability. Okay, all that is positive. So StarWar is really situation to task. You took Johnny to go to the bank. Action taken by staff. You handed in the deposit slip. The result of the action was Johnny self-esteem went down and the cashier felt he wasn't capable. Alternative action, practice with Johnny first before you get to the bank. Make sure the check is in his hand as he's standing there. An alternative result, Johnny is proud to have handed the check over and he feels better about himself. That is called StarWar. That's the system for giving feedback. And you don't have to be a robot when you do it. You don't, and I wouldn't announce it to the staff, okay, we're doing StarWar, you know, and then say situation or task. I don't think you should do that. But you should do it in a very natural way that you feel comfortable. Okay, don't sound like a bit of a robot in doing it. But if you practice it, you'll see the benefits of it, especially the result of the action and then what alternative could you use? And that's a great time for staff to brainstorm. And one of the reasons I ask them first is I want them to bring their brains to work. I'm not going to be out there with them in the community all the time. They're going to have to think ahead. So I want them to do that with me in supervision. Okay, and then to summarize the meeting, and then I'm going to show you a couple more things, and then I'm going to take any questions you have. What are your strengths? And what might you do differently to become an even better support professional? I always like to end the meeting by asking them to summarize what we talked about rather than have me summarize it. I used to do that. I used to summarize the meeting and say, okay, so this is what you're good at, and this is what you need to do that's different, and they would walk out, and a week later, it's like we never had the meeting, okay? And I'm not sure what they heard, and I'm not sure what they're walking away with. The only way to know is to ask them, okay? Let them summarize the meeting. So what are your strengths? What did we say you do really well? You have a great relationship with Johnny. Terrific. Great relationship. Excellent. You know, you're very supportive of him. What might you do differently? Well, you need to do more preparation work with him before you go out into the community. And this is the staff talking, okay? I want to hear it from them, not from me. So that's how I would end the meeting, and that's how I recommend giving feedback. Now, I want to show you something, and it's going to be interesting trying to find it here. I think it's here. Okay, just give me a second. I'm kind of, oh, here it is. All right, this is actually on the website. This is where it says videos. And if you go down to 4C, handouts that should be used, and now I'm sorry, go down to 4E. Let me try to get down there. How can I scroll this? I'm looking for the scroll so I can move it. This is when you need some help from somebody. Here we go. All right, now I see it. Okay, so this is the stash feedback form. I created this form really because when I was teaching this to staff, I sort of look in their face like, how are we going to remember everything you just told us? And how are we going to prepare for the meeting? That doesn't require a ton of preparation when I sit down with the staff, but keeps me organized. So I kind of mumbled to one group. I said, well, what if you had a staff feedback form? And they said, oh, that's a good idea. So I went back to Region 3, and I spoke to the members of the team, and we came up with this staff feedback form. And basically, let me just take you through it. It's kind of a reminder of what to do. you'd have the staff name, your name, the date. Now, number one, thank them for their effort. It's a reminder. So you're sitting there, and you may want to jump into what the issue is. And what I've been teaching you is not to start that way. Start by making sure that the staff know they're being appreciated for trying to do. I mean, he went to the bank. Johnny went to the bank. He took the individual to the bank. We want to praise him for his effort. It is difficult if there's a long line at the bank and our guys are struggling a little bit. So we can acknowledge that. Ask about interaction with individual before offering feedback. Remember, I talked about that. So ask the staff, what did you think? How did it go? And again, that's to improve their morale. Now, areas to praise, what I do is I go into the core competencies and I look for an area to praise. Now, the core competencies are huge, and we know that, and you can get lost in it. I would recommend most of the praise is coming out of goal 1, putting people first, and goal 2, building positive relationships. So I would quickly go down, A through whatever, and look at those competencies. So for instance, competency area C has to do with advocacy. So in advocacy in goal number 1, that could be an area to praise because you were trying to teach Johnny to be a self-advocate, whatever, you can put that in. But I would write that out because I want to take out the tool and hand the tool to the staff and show them exactly where in the competencies they did something well. And that way you're using the tool ongoing. It's a live document. It's not a piece of paper that sits in a drawer. Ask about problems and concerns. Ask them. And then you can take notes. You see there's a little room there to take notes. And then the last thing is areas that require developmental feedback. Now, for instance, in goal number 1, putting people first, letter D, has to do with supporting facilitation of growth and development. And there's a little section in there on teaching and taking advantage of moments to teach. And maybe there could have been a moment where he could have taught Johnny something in the bank, maybe how to speak to the teller. Because sometimes some of the people we support might start telling personal stories to the teller, and that's inappropriate. So, that would be a good moment before he speaks to the teller to take advantage of an informal moment. And that's in the competencies. If you look in D, under goal number 1, you'll see it. Okay, then, so this page, to fill this out before the meeting, takes about 5 minutes. That's all. You just have to get familiar with the competencies and what do you want to pinpoint. On the next page is StarWar. Here it is. And this is the page I actually give the staff at the end of the meeting because I want them to walk away with something concrete that we agreed on. So what was the situation at task? What was the action taken? What was the result of the action? Okay. And as we just went over that. And then the second section is what alternative, instead of what the action was up here, what's the alternative that you're going to do differently the next time, and what would be the result? And it says on the bottom, thank you. Always remember to say thank you to the staff at the end of the meeting, and give staff a copy so that they have it and they can refer to it when they go back out and do their work. Also, you can file this, you can keep it in their personnel file, and in the next meeting, you can pull it out and say, okay, tell me what happened, with your alternative action, how did it go, and then you can move on to another page. So it's excellent documentation that shows you're using the competencies. So I highly recommend the staff feedback form. Okay, I kind of went over everything I need to go over, and we have a few minutes left. And I'm wondering if any of you have any questions or concerns. So I'm going to see if anyone writes a question. I'm more than happy to answer them. Okay, and I'm looking for questions. Oh, okay, I don't see any questions. I just want to make sure, I think most people know this, but I want to go back to the website for a second and make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about here. The home page of the website, here it is. This is the workforcetransformation.org website. Oh, I see. Oh, a question just came in as I was doing that. And the question reads, is there a particular approach you recommend for hiring a supervisor regarding support leadership? Oh boy. You know, because I think when I got hired, if I think now, I don't know if I would have hired myself, because I had no experience in supervision. I had never done supervision in my life. And they made me the supervisor because I had a master's degree. And I must have had some innate quality that came out. But in terms of hiring a supervisor, it's a different skill set, as we know, than being a DSP. And often we try to take the best DSPs and make them supervisors. And that could turn out to be okay. It could. It also could not, even though we tend to do better internally. But I would just ask them a lot of questions about, you know, not specific to supervision, but in general, how do they relate to people? If someone has if they notice someone has a problem, how would they approach it? That's the type of thing I think I would talk about. But I've worked with so many different supervisors, and they all have different personalities and different strengths. So I think in supervision it's tough. I do know, and I will say this, that at YI we had much more success promoting from within than we did hiring someone from the outside. Because when we hired people from the outside, they may have been great in the interview. They answered every question great, but then their personality kind of wasn't so wonderful when they took the job, or they got overwhelmed with the work. While someone internally, we got to know them a much longer period of time. I would recommend having an assistant soup level position for a DSP to move into rather than jump right to supervisor, and that would give them a lot more time to practice supervision. So I would definitely recommend that. Okay, and that's the answer to that one. And thank you, whoever wrote that. And again, I just want to highlight, we do have a wonderful website through NYSACRA and in the Regional Centers for Workforce Transformation. And again, you can get to it by doing workforcetransformation.org. And if you want to contact me, if you go to contact side of the page, first of all, under Region 3, which is not coming up on the screen, but it does exist. Okay, there it is. Now I can do it. Okay, so Region 3, you see my name, Perry Samowitz, and there is, and I work for an agency called NYSRA, New York State Rehab Association, and there is my email address, perry@nyrehab.org. And then down here, I am the third picture. There I am. So now you know what I look like. And there's a phone number here at what do you call it? At NYSRA, but I would recommend an email. An email is really the quickest way to get to me. And I'd be more than happy to speak with you. And I really highly recommend, I want to end on this note, I highly recommend you go to the video, which is on the website, and take a look at it, because you'll see I actually play the role of a supervisor, and you'll see. Okay, another question came up. 3 questions came up. Okay, the next questions. Okay, how are you feeling about StarWar being used for known or discovered supervisory issues? Format just for healthy feedback, or is it part of the disciplinary process? Oh, I see. I didn't really cover today disciplinary issues. I think most agencies have procedures for dealing with that, and most supervisors get a lot of support in dealing with that type of issue. I'm trying to talk today about a different issue, which is how do we support staff our good to excellent staff to really be highly skilled. That's what I wanted to focus on today, and that's where I think StarWar is best. So I honestly, that's a separate course altogether on dealing with disciplinary issues. So I hope that answers the question. But I don't think StarWar is the approach I would use with that. There's a whole different, as I said, that would be a whole other webinar. Okay, and then there's another question, and I'm going to try to find it. Here it is, right? Love your evaluation forms. Are they available on the Workforce Transformation site? Yes, they are, actually. The evaluation forms are on the website. Actually, let me try to find them for you, if I can do that. Okay, I guess, how do I go back here? Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to find them here. I hope I'm not. Okay, here we go. And it's under communicating the competent. No, it's under the resources. I know where it is now. Okay, here they are. Here are the evaluation tools. It says it's about the 6th item down. It says core competencies and evaluation tools, and if you click on that, it has all the, here, initial evaluation tool, annual evaluation tool, and then it has, for people who are out in the community who are not readily seen by their supervisor, there's evaluation tools for individuals, family members, and other advocates, and you can download these tools. They're there for you to use. So I hope that's helpful. That was a very good question. Okay, now I got to go back here. Let's see. Okay, I just want to thank all of you. No? Oh, would you thank them? I misread it, I'm sorry. Would you thank them for coming to meet with you? Absolutely. You know, I want staff to feel appreciated. That's why I always thank them for their effort, but also thank them for meeting with me. And you raise a very good point. This is not a punitive process. We are there to support the staff. I've heard a lot out in the field that staff only meet with their supervisor when something goes wrong. That's not what we're talking about today. This is positive supervision. If we support our staff to develop their skills in a positive way, they will then treat the individuals in a positive way. So it all ties in. And remember, the DSPs are the most important staff in any organization. They do the work. So how we treat them is critical. So absolutely would I thank them for coming to meet with me, but I would have them meet with me on a regular basis. It shouldn't be a one-shot deal and 6 months later they meet with me. It should be at least on a monthly basis. And a lot of agencies in Region 3 now are mandating that their staff meet with the supervisors at least monthly to have a sit-down meeting where they can feel supported and it not turn into a punitive thing. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, if you're meeting with a staff who is not a good staff, how would you start the meeting if you're not thanking them for their effort? Well, if they're not a good staff overall, that means that they're really struggling. I need to start that way, and I need to say to them, look, based upon the core competencies, currently you're not meeting the standards of this job. Now, I want to give you a chance to improve, and I want to go over very specifically what you need to do to improve, and hopefully you will. And I'm willing to do my share to help you, but you've got to be willing to do your share. Okay, that's how I would address it. But that's different. You see, that is a very succinct message I want to give them. They have to know along the route that they're not making it. You know, I've heard from many agencies where I've been training that they'll keep staff 2 years, and the staff person's mediocre. And I say, why did you keep them? Well, you know, we needed a body, you know, we're short-staffed, and we all understand that. But, you know, the staff has never gotten the message that they're underperforming. And the beauty of the competencies is now we have defined the skills. And you can look them in the eye and say, look, in these areas you're underperforming. And if it keeps going on your evaluation, you're going to be underperforming. And then it gets even more serious. Okay? So that's how I would address it. And that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And I think I got all the questions in. I'm taking another look to see what the questions are. Well, here's one. How are you feeling about StarWar being used for known or discovery supervisory issues? Format just for healthy feedback, or is it, oh, we talked about this very process. I mentioned that earlier. Okay, I think I've covered almost anything. Here's a question. Hi, I'm a manager with Sheltering Arms, and we are teaching our staff to transform from their direct care professionals to direct support. That's excellent. My question is, how do we find an effective way to teach staff to learn how to be teachers themselves for our individuals? Oh boy. That is probably that's a brilliant question, by the way, and I want to thank you for asking it. You know, in the core competencies, there's one little box, and it's under competency D, which is, about the learning, and teaching. And there's a little mention of teaching. And to be very honest, teaching people with intellectual disabilities is not a simple skill. And I do a whole separate course just on how to teach. Because you're dealing with all the issues of the cognitive processes and all that, and you got to break it down for staff so they really understand it. And the core competencies does not do that. So as I said, that's a whole separate training. And I'll give you one hint, though, because this is one thing I learned, and is that people with intellectual disabilities usually have trouble inputting information. Okay? They have these input deficits. And how we work with them to input information will determine whether they learn something. So I always, in the beginning of a teaching moment, go very slow. And I make sure in a multisensory way that they're inputting the information they need before we ask them to make decisions. Okay? And it's usually pictures. I'll use pictures. It depends on their abilities. But I've learned that, they are in some ways slow learners, and one way of overcoming that is through the input. But that's not covered in the competencies. That's really a great question, though. Okay, I think we are now, it's 5:02. I just want to thank everyone for listening. You know how to reach me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have, and I want you to have a great day. And thank you so much. Okay, bye.